Hi, YouTube crashed. I guess everybody is presumably gone, but there's nothing much I can do about that. Hi. We'll get back to work and people will find their way over. So there's that. Anywho, sorry about that, folks. So weird combination of YouTube and OBS and who knows what else crashing. Everything crashed. Everything crashed and went splat. But we're back, continuing to do the thing. So here's the question now. What parts of this could do with updates? So here's where I left off. I was figuring out what to do with the settings on B, seeing as I was in the process of figuring that out. And that seems to be working okay. So let's try some variations, like a 6x6 2000 seater. That should have more space inside it for variations, and sure enough, I do indeed see like blue sparkles in there. It's trying to do its thing, and the brightness canceling stuff is kicking in. So that's probably going to be fine. Let's try some of the variations. And we'll again go to 2000 seater, but we'll try the 5x5. Okay, that's genuinely funny. So in that case, we have a very high score that is only increasing as we go, so that's weird. And nothing is counting but naturalness and spacing, because I think this was never meant to run quite like this. That said, the code having to do with blueness of the output does appear to be, and hello, somebody hearted. That's because you found your way to the new stream. Again, OBS crashed and YouTube crashed and everything crashed other than Godot and my program. It all crashed except for what I was working on. What I was working on is fine. So yeah, you can see I'm running a 5x5 matrix. I've made it be 2000 seats, and it is trying to work out what it means by that. I never did work out what the correct setting for R is for that, but that's why it's doing what it's doing. Let's jump right over to attempting. Again, the guts of this, I think, is working. 4x4. So what I'm trying to do is work out, oh, and look, this has lots of blue in it, except for not in the useful, oh, interesting. Lots of blue in it, not in the usefulness of ways. And it's like dialing back to some extent. That's interesting. The spacing with the tiny black pixels between the colored pixels means that it's capable of making problematic results where it's like high pixels interspersed with 0 pixels, meaning maximum slew. But I have it at such a large hull size that there's space between everything. So nothing's really stacking up on top of each other. And it's showing the square root factor of that. I'm also seeing some of the cyan pixels, which imply both a prime number echo return and also a large slew. But then a lot of these are going to have large slews because it's such a large reverb that there's space between everything. It'll act differently if I tighten it up more than a little bit, which might be an idea. What I'm really trying to do is figure out what to do with these two settings, E and G. Because I've changed the function, so it logically should end up meaning something else. We've got this much effect. If I change this to B and G, it's not going to force an update because I was not relying upon that measurement very much anyhow. Okay, so score, we settled on 60K. If we do this over again, 4x4, 2,000 seat. But we're going to go for the maximum effect. What happens? We had got to 60K. It's being more restrictive this time. It's not doing that much, though. $106K. Well, it is having a strong effect, I'll give it that. Let's see what happens when I try the same thing over a much smaller space. Maximum effect, only 200 seats, 4x4. See all the little blocks of green in there where it's kind of heading across as a continuous span of green. That's not going to produce slew because it's a series of reverb returns that are not flickering between silence and then reverb return again. Whereas over here we've got a bunch of flickering between silence and high values. And a bunch of them are clearly also primes, but that doesn't necessarily matter to us. So it's being fairly restrictive on that stuff. If we stop being restrictive in the beginning, we are forcing an update. There's still a lot happening. I'm warming to the idea. See, here's my thinking, and this is a little abstract, but I'm going to think it anyway. I'm using a system where I'm going into early reflections, and the early reflections are not filtered. And then we wind up with the reverb tail. The reverb tail is going to be out of something like this. It may very well be more filtered than that. If the reverb tail is more filtered, and it starts with a sound that is unfiltered, and then this new control picks stuff where the thing at whatever position in the reverb tail is suppressed based on how bright it is. Setting it as AZ means it will allow through any amount of brightness as long as it's up in the front, which technically is not, it doesn't linearly interpolate from beginning to end. It does it through a kind of logarithmic taper. So beginning stuff is really like right up in the beginning, and then the whole tail is more governed by the end. Wouldn't it be fun if we just reverted everything to kind of like this? Remembering, I'm displaying it differently, I'm evaluating it differently. The actual tail is not changed. I have not made the tail become brighter. I'm just displaying a different amount of effect on this, which makes me wonder, okay, let's quit out of here and assume that that is what I want to do. Namely, starts at A, which is no effect, goes to D, which matches the other end of this. So GC, FC, AD, DD is the way that shape stuff works. If I now run this again, we can fool around with various things like a 6x6 at 2,000 seats, see what it does. And I also feel like I'm used to seeing that as a green shape rather than explicitly a blue or a cyan shape. There's two things I can do about that. And one of them is not multiply this by as large a amount. We're still using the square root, although with some of these it really isn't going to matter. But it ought to be displaying itself differently this time. How about splitting the difference? 1,000 seats. Here's our new default settings. Here's our default behavior. Do we get an appropriate score? Does it look like it should? Well, with that guy, I'm not seeing much in the way of course, with these, they kind of are darker, though, aren't they? So I've made the display stuff be consistent across different things, but then the question is, what's going to happen when we start running different sizes? It looks like the answer is we get a tinge of blue. We don't go as heavily into cyan. Beyond that, it seems basically correct. The amount of effect that's happening seems about right. Force an update. Or apparently not. No, it likes this one. It's done. It's like, this is great. I'm staying here. If I keep turning down the number, it should eventually update. Wow, it really likes this one a lot. It likes this very much. It doesn't want to update at all, does it? Could it be that changing the darkness and depth factor from A to B had that much of an effect that nothing else does anything? One way to find out. Go here. Change it to B out the get-go. And we'll include the text BFDD for big freaking derpy deal. And then see what it does. How's this look now? Okay, that must have been what did it. I went from AF to BF, and it changed the weighting of everything so profoundly that it simply didn't register anything else that I did anymore. So if I started at BF, then everything is based on how it started the run, which is correct. So that is honestly looking decent to me. There was one thing I was thinking of playing with. Being able to draw whether the delay returns were left or right. The trouble with that, though, is it would make it a noisy mess visually, because I'd be going back and forth between like green and red. Plus, I don't think I'm actually marking which ones are left and which ones are right, although I can calculate it. This is into the matrix. This is a program rather than a plugin. It's in the Godot engine, and it's what I use to make reverbs with. And I'm currently evolving its treatment of high frequencies. So let's look at some of the other ones. Again, 4x4. I'm basically happy with a bunch of these settings. I'm also happy with how that looks. Again, what it's doing is it's watching for series of notes, series of delay returns is what these are. Like delay echo shows up here and here and here. And then if they're in little runs like this where it looks like a solid block, that is not a high slew situation. A high slew situation, which causes high frequency noise, is when you have a rapid spattering between loud delay returns and silence. And the largest extreme between loudest delay return and silence, or two different loudest delay returns following each other, the more the output of the reverb will tend to produce intersample peaks and high frequency artifacts. And we have effectively made this resist those now, in that it's not actually changing any of the ones that this generates, but the appearance of the blue stripe here means that it is evaluating how much of that is happening, and if there's too much of that happening, it rejects the attempt and we never see it. So we are only seeing what it considers to be the best of the best, and that is a calculating factor. My idea was that it should balance these various calculating factors, and in fact that is what it's doing. It's made some of them that sound like Spring Reverb. And it's not really like Space Designer because it generates algorithmic reverbs, not convolution impulses. Although it's a little bit like a convolution impulse, because what we're looking at is the output of a householder matrix. Let's just look at the 200 and the 3x3 matrix. In fact, let's look at it so much that we literally see the 3x3 matrix. Oop, there you go. But we don't get to see that update, do we? And that's because that's the template. That's where it's drawn on the screen. But it's not going to update when I run this. But this part will. Okay, so the thing about having only 27 delay returns is that they almost never do anything contributing to brightness. And that's because the individual delays are simply not close enough to each other to do intersample peaking. So that basically is never going to be involved. but that seems fine. Although we can force the issue by having a very small room. This should probably get it involved a little bit more. Or perhaps not even. No, it kind of is. So you see the distinct lines? If there are tiny gaps between those lines, that's going to amount, and you see it in the colors just a little bit. It's a dark blue to a slightly brighter color, not much in the way of cyan, not much in the way of green, but it is kind of showing up. This is showing up as a bright cyan. That means it's both a prime and also a high frequency moment. And it looks like it's capable of generating the thing. Only thing I'm thinking about now is shape. Because I'm going to generate a new version of this. I'm going to upload it to GitHub so that other people can get their hands on it. And I'm going to export a version of it that I can run 15 instances of overnight. Oh, look, another one. For the purpose of making some new reverb sounds out of these raw materials. So let's see. So I'm going to want to do it using 6x6 matrices because I've done plenty with the 4x4s, and in fact I can do those throughout the day. It's just exhausting. I've spent like 10 hours on this today. So if this is our base amount, and if I'm going for, say, let's start at about 600 seats, that's a big hall kind of size. And then shape is going to play a role. So what does shape do? If shape is a higher letter, like Z or whatever, it's effectively removing that from the calculation. So mid-verb density means that the sound kind of gathers in the center of the reverb tail. It's a big solid oomph. This is the kind of thing that you can get if you have something that's otherwise good, but all the delays are roughly equal in length. It's not going to produce weird early stuff. It's not going to produce unusually late stuff. Instead, it's just going to combine. What we're looking at, matrix delays, any path across or down, this is all generating random numbers in a set of variables looking just like that. They happen to not be in the screen of the running program because the running program's window is too small to show them. It looks like this. That's the size of the window. There's a black panel behind it. And these are also part of the program, but they're not shown because they're outside the size of the window. So if shape at either the beginning or the end is lower, what that's going to do is, and I'm now wondering, I'm quitting out of there again. There's another change that I made that I may be able to undo. I'm interested in whether this is a good time to do that. So these all are basically the same except for different sizes of matrices. And here is where a bunch of this stuff gets calculated. Like, here's the green channel. We're doing every combination of the delays involved and just adding up the number of delays in every permutation, which is what this is doing. It's going to figure out what the longest and shortest of the delays can be and adding an amount. And then we have this. So here's the thing. It's adjust shape T minus, and oh, I see something interesting about that too. Oh goodness, yes I do. That's interesting. So adjust shape T alters between a larger number and a smaller number. With many of these things, like adjust green and so on, what happens is if the adjust thing is a very small number, you set it to A because it's coded by letters so that I can write out the settings from any run. The way I've got this calculated out, what? How would I arrive at this? Where am I doing adjust? It's going to be up here. Adjust shape, resize, array size. Adjust shape is going to be the same. Oh no, not quite. Not quite. I see what I did that's different. Adjust shapes T dry sample plus wet sample times X, so that goes from 0 to 1. Then it's times 0.2. I am dialing back the amount of change that can have quite a bit. Then plus 1.1. So this is going to always be at least 1.1 or maybe a tiny bit larger. And that's because it actually goes from 0 to 25 really, so we're dialing that back quite a bit. And then that is subtracted abs sine float t divided by float longest 14.0. So what that does, see if I have blank paper in here anywhere. If you're generating a sine wave, what it's doing is it's generating a sine wave based on the position in the window. This is the peak amount. I have set it up so that it is producing that highest point relative to longest divided by 14, or t divided by longest divided by 14. What that means is if you have a dense little cloud of reverb, that will put the peak of the sine calculation of both of those things at the center of the verb. And then it continues, and as you reach sort of the end of the reverb cloud, what happens is it's no longer subtracting that amount. And then disp delays t divided by the end result of all of this. The upshot of it is if this becomes larger, then the end result of adjust shape t is becoming smaller because it's being corrected by that. If you're dividing by a number that is smaller, then it becomes a larger disp delays t. As a result, the whole thing is sort of continuous across the entire window. And if it's a larger disp delays t, most gets added by that, combined with adjust green, and is max that. So it's providing a sort of minimum setting, and most is the score. So it's giving it opportunities for any given point to lower the score. So here's the thing. I have a absolute value controller there. So it's doing this. That means that sound in the very end of the reverb tail is being hit by this. So what's happening here? Well, the way it worked out was, oh God, also, I have just realized something. I need to get my oven going for tacos. Give me a moment. Won't be long. Hey, I'm back. Okay, so one thing I am fairly happy about today is it's actually a really hot day, but I'm not feeling it because I'm using a kind of ventilation system in my house where I have air pulled through the basement, and the basement is cooler than the outdoors. And it seems to be working fairly well, so it's actually quite comfortable. Back to the actual work. Upshot of all this talk about the stuff is this has an absolute value function put into it rather than allowing the sign to go all the way through to be a negative value. If you take a just shape T and subtract a negative value, you're only making it larger. And if you're making it larger, you're allowing, because what's happening here, I'll run it again. We set it to something and we run it, and we have shape B like some very small number, C or B or something. What happens is it suppresses the desirability of reverb outputs in the center of this measurement. Whereas if you had it as a higher number, it would be more willing to have reverb showing up in the center. I can make it mark the center so that it's drawing a little spot, and it'll show up like right in the middle of that cloud. That said, what happens when you do that hard enough is it starts making really wide clouds, kind of like this. And that's because it is seeking distributions of householder matrix values, where when they all get combined together, what's going to happen from doing this is that you have some echoes showing up really early, because there were combinations of the matrices where one of the possibilities all the way across was a small number. There's going to be situations where one of the possibilities all the way across was a very large number, and so that the final result ends up being a very large delay all the way out here. And it'll tend to suppress the stuff in the middle. And I found some of that helps the reverb sound better. We're basically adjusting the distribution of which random numbers show up in these things by a fitness function and essentially the genetic algorithm. because we're trying to evolve our way to reverbs that sound good. So, why is this abs there? Why does it suppress the stuff at the most dense part, but then also not reward the stuff way out on the reverb tail? And the answer to that would be, because I have it's the Chesterton's fence thing. The reason that is there is because I've had previous versions of this program where if you didn't have that in absolute value, it would start rewarding reverb results that are very late in, and then the resulting reverb gets longer and longer and longer until it only is willing to do like 60,000 seat arenas, even if you asked it to do like a 200 seat hall. It would just start expanding outwards. And so I have an absolute value thing in there, which is trying to resist that behavior. And I'm now resisting that behavior with other things. Let's see what happens having just removed that. Oh, and I could also lower this, but if I lower these numbers, the numbers that are getting in the way of things, sometimes it simply forces an update. I might have it do a thing where I've made a change and that immediately allows it to hit a lower score and it just kind of goes from there. That said, I don't think we got there. That says update number 3. I don't think that's enough updates, to be honest with you. Let's start it over again and try from... Frequently changing these on the fly is bad news. So let's see. So shape exaggerates how much that happens. So it's going to switch stuff in the middle and enhance stuff right at the beginning or right at the end. We've currently got it potentially exaggerating this stuff way the heck at the end. Let's see what happens when we run it. See, what I'm looking to see is this sort of cloudy effect around the edges, which implies that there's a bunch of reverb returns showing up in a kind of... My assumption is that I probably want it to... See, now I'm wondering whether I want the... it to lean towards more reverb density up front, because it looks like I'm able to produce a pretty even path, although at about half the size I want. The scattering of this is looking promising, because again, what I'm going to be doing is running this over the course of an entire evening, running it overnight, so that it can produce results that I can then test out. And I'm always game for like adjusting all of the things in the process. Also, we're setting up a little, actually, I have another thought. Don't mind me, all full of thoughts today. So shape midverb density, that's looking about right, except for that it's kind of early on. Forcing stuff to show up early like this, shape low will cause that to happen. Shape of high will cause it to happen less. Oh dear. Don't mind me, I'm doing all manner of derpy things. I have to fire up YouTube again. And that is because I quit out of... Ooh, I'm going to watch Adam Millard, the Architect of Gaming, later. but not now because I'm working. Let's pop chat back out. I don't know why I did that. I must have opened up YouTube without meaning to. No matter. It fired back up. So I can see chat once more. I will, as is my habit, set it to live chat. People so rarely comment anyhow that it doesn't matter. And here we go. Now if I quit, this will shut off. So where was I at when I was talking about that stuff? So shape being a smaller number, granted it is in the form of a letter, expands out the ability to reach both early and late. I think there's enough early going on in here. Although, honestly, that might be just fine. I'm not seeing much in the way of late, and I just changed it to sort of accentuate that. I was looking to see whether that was causing unreasonable amount, like I removed the absolute function there. Let's do it on the other ones as well. If I can find them, okay, there's blue, there's red. Here we go. So this is the thing which I had to put in there in order to stop it from freaking out and running away. And I'm now going to try to find it in every other place, and we're just going to test the heck out of this because I think I can get away with this now. And thank you for your contribution, Wooly. Rock on. And also here, and having saved that, we were looking to change some of these things around. So how about this gets boosted a little bit. And the big question was shape. Do I have that also to change from beginning to the end? Because it's applying a lot of, it's doing a lot. I dropped it to C. Let's live dangerously and have it be doing a whole bunch of a lot. C to B at the end. The way this is working is I am essentially conning it into misbehaving. GC, FC, CG, CB. Interesting. So, back to our rather largish room. We'll run it, and we're going to see what kinds of clouds of stuff this produces. I'm already seeing a tendency for the high frequency stuff to cluster up front. That's a desirable outcome. But the reason for the absolute function there was to stop it from running away and making the sizes become too huge. I'm not seeing that right now. I am not seeing it do that. Mind you, it's only gotten up to update 7, but the rest of it still seems to be. Indeed, Herrenbach. If you have not seen this before, I can show you the results. So we'll briefly quit out of there. Just the size of my window so that I can have access to other things in my computer. I am generating householder matrices in a matrix like this one that you see. That's what's being updated. And in so doing, I can use the householder matrices to produce reverb sounds like these. I'll even go full on and show it to you directly, like these. And here's another. And this one was earlier today or yesterday. Here's a smaller one. I can't actually hear these now. And then you can also do stuff like this. But note that it's not actually an impulse response, and I'll tell you why. It's not an impulse response because it's a householder matrix that is generated by having each of these be an individual delay. What you see here is a bunch of them say 281, but that doesn't matter. We're producing very different ones. And the sound is audio going into each of these in turn, and then the output of each of these goes into each of the following 6. And then the output from that goes into each of the following 6. And so on. And the way I do it, it also goes vertically as well as horizontally to produce stereo imaging. And then when you take the output of it, since it is a householder matrix, you can feed the output back into the input again. And it will never go out of control. It will always be contained no matter what the reverb settings are. So it's just a matter of finding out what those numbers need to be. And that's what this program is for. So if I run that under these settings, let's try a 300. And what it's plotting here, every pixel that is not black, not counting the red ones are showing actually I could draw those in a different place, but the red ones are not showing that. The red ones are showing spacing between discrete samples. On a 6x6 matrix, the middle part, there are no black spots, there is no gaps between the solidness of the reverb. Wooly, that would be the current stuff. This reverb stuff is my current favorite, that's why I'm working on it. And basically I'm looking at this and deciding whether I've got this dialed in correctly. Because I would like to see more in the way of the high frequency suppression stuff kicking in, but the thing is, I am only ever seeing stuff that passes all of these tests. So if there's anything that shows up in the blue channel and is producing a lot of high frequency information I don't want, I won't see it because it won't pass these tests. Each of these things is a test. I'll see you later, Grins. Yeah, well, I'm going to go and have tacos at 5 today. It looks like I didn't get to do VSTification work for K Beyond, but this has been worthy anyhow. In fact, so much so that I think it's at this stage of, well, I think it's at this stage of pushing the changes, but I should try some of these other settings. Like, for instance, 900 seat room in a 4x4 matrix, because I render those fairly often. So this thing that I did with shape would, in theory, be able to produce a runaway where all of a sudden all of the results are ending up being longer and longer to the point where it doesn't even work. Or possibly it's trying to do that, and then the controls I have for restricting that behavior are getting in the way. I wonder whether I'm starting to see that. Because here's the thing. It's running a sort of statistical program on what currently says variations tried so far. That's large numbers of variations. It's doing that to try to evolve towards what's going to be the ultimate plugin for this run of the program. And I run 15 of them next to each other and collect all of those and then go and listen to them and measure them. So if this starts making larger and larger reverbs to the point where it's like, oh, you wanted 900 seats? How about 10,000? Well, that's useless because that means the fitness functions have found a special case. The fitness functions have found a way to cheat, basically. And half of my work on this program is stopping it from cheating, stopping it from going, oh, is this what you're looking for? Hey, I'll stack all of these on this one magic spot, and then all of my results would be perfect. And it's actually just screwing itself up because the program itself does not know what a reverb is or what sounds good. And it's definitely a lot of work for me figuring out what's going to sound good because there aren't any rules about that. You can't go and ask ChatGPT this kind of thing. It doesn't know. Nobody out there knows. It's me trying to figure this stuff out. And it's coming along fairly well. Again, today's work was both wading through a whole pile of outputs and measuring and rating them all. It was also about figuring out that I have a purpose for results that are predominantly RMS rather than predominantly peak. I've been focusing only on peak. And what that does is it makes stuff sound realistic. But when stuff is all RMS and doesn't have any peak, it makes it sound like thick clouds of reverb hanging in the air. And there are people who like that, so I should make one like that to cater to them. All the better if all of the reverbs and all of the things sound super different from each other, especially since they're all literally just arrangements of householder matrices. So one of the things that is occurring to me as I stare at this, watching it not be able to do any better than this output, is that this is affected by shape. Shape forces it to try to accentuate stuff like up front, early on, or stuff towards the end. Up front is controlled by this part. Towards the end is controlled by this part. It's not putting anything up front here, but it is using that change that I just made to load up everything towards the what it's going to be if you looked at the numbers, and it would actually be a 4x4 set of numbers, is all the numbers are large, none of the numbers are small. It's not covering any of the early reflection stuff. This spacings, the first spacing is like 25 seconds after the initial sound, and then silence, and then eventually you wind up getting one of those. I would rather see a broader band of echoes rather than them all being packed into here. What this tells me is that this number, which is a letter being converted to a number so that I can store it as letters, like you see under here, if we run the program, this line of code includes all the settings and what size of matrix it is. So I have it as letters for a reason. But these are too small. Oh, it found another one. Only problem is that other one is also got exactly the same problem. This number is too small. This number is reinforcing its ability to place these reverbs. Like the ones that show up here are getting scored way higher than anything else, and so it's not letting anything else through. I have an adjustment to make, and I have found a correct way of evaluating that. So let's go with D. Let's go real hard away from that. So if I make this be less effective, it probably will still be That's the stuff I was talking about when I said I removed the absolute function. Also, when I adjust these, all of the instantiations start up with just the new value. What did I have? I had 900. So now it's time to see whether it's able to place any of the echo returns early rather than late. It's placing them very, 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 very late. But since it's doing a 750 seat theater when being asked for 900 seats, this is not like shape is supposed to suppress everything ending up in the middle like that. I'm kind of seeing everything ending up in the middle like that, but some of this is still correct. I think it's that absolute function. I think that's what's going on there. If shape being a lower letter causes it to force things to go in that way, and shape being a higher letter has less effect on this, then shape at the end being a substantially higher letter is going to cause it to not dump stuff towards the end as hard. And I can probably do that fairly elegantly. Let's push it way in this direction. G. Or even farther. B will cause it to really hit up front. It'll really attempt to reinforce the stuff up front. But then we are profoundly discouraging it from placing echoes really, really late. Maybe I will start seeing the, hey, look at that. I'm seeing a bunch of useful things, although I'm not sure if it's going to stick. It started out good. So what I'm looking to see, and this is a rather challenging mode for it to be doing it. It doesn't really want to be doing 4x4 matrices that are this big. Although an interesting quality of it is I see a tinge of blue up top, which is what's supposed to be happening with the brightness control. Is it supposed to really resist anything happening towards the end of the reverb tail? It's going kind of late again. And you know, there might be a reason for that. So if we increase setting, we're kind of in a zone. I'm liking that pattern of echoes. The first echo is way too late, but I'm still liking that pattern of echoes. What I'm now wondering is, can I adjust the very first set of controls, which have to do with what's being suppressed and what's being let through? I think I'm suppressing stuff up front by this and not letting through stuff in the end, or letting through stuff in the end by this. Let's see what happens if we rerun it. And instead, actually, I will just try that. We're going to reverse the controls. We're going to reverse the polarity of the neutron flow. C and G rather than G and C. This should make something happen. The question is it going to make the thing happen that I thought was going to happen? Oh? Looks a little bit like it's trying harder to put stuff up front, even though it's a very large hall. Again, I am trying to come up with values here where it will fill this entire area from like up front here to all the way back here, even though it's only a 4x4 matrix. It's asking a lot. Maybe I can lower this even more. Typically, if you were lowering numbers of these things, it'll let stuff happen more easily, because you're lowering the challenge of coming up with an acceptable result. 603. That is smaller, and it's taking up a little more different space. I'm also really liking I don't have a gradient in the graphics here. It has no control over whether to draw the stuff on the top in a tinge of blue and the stuff on the bottom in a tinge of green. That's just the result of the random numbers being generated and put into the householder matrix and being measured in a certain way. It could just as easily be green up top and blue on the tail, but I didn't want it to do that. I wanted it to do blue up top and no blue in the tail, and it's consistently doing that. I'm going to say I'm pretty pleased with that part of the result. So it's neat. It's preventing itself from getting over large, even though the shape is doing what it does. Oh, I wonder if I can make everything go from B to G. Probably no point in doing that. But I've got things going from B to G fairly often, don't I? The difference is the natural spacing, which goes the opposite direction. Can we force an update? Yes. See, if this one is predominating the algorithm, I get realistic sounds, but they don't have a lot of bloom and sparkle. There's not a sense of airiness in there. It's just sort of like a dead, dull room that is convincing. So BG, EC, CG, BG. Let's try having that be the default. And the way this works, it's better if you leave these alone after you start running the program. Changing them can easily get it to the point where it's like, okay, I'm satisfied. I can't do better than this now. So you run it from scratch in that state. I'm defaulting it to this now. And let's see what it tries to do with like a 150 seat room in a 4x4 matrix. I see some characteristic stuff in there. There was just a hint of trying to have the bright stuff happen up front, which is what I'm asking it to do. That said, I am not sure. This is the spacings of where the echoes will end up being. Remembering, of course, that the stuff that gets put into the matrix here, it's how we calculate this, but none of these echoes are any one of these numbers. One of the echoes, for instance, is going to be, let me restart it. I am not interested in this 150-seater anymore. Let's restart it and do 700. So this is generating numbers for this stuff. Ooh, I'm liking the look of that. I like that one very much. It's a big, fat cloud that starts fairly early and extends for a long time. I want to increase this behavior a lot. So what is going to happen is we're generating all these combinations by taking the audio, going through this grid from like right to left. And one of the results, if we use these numbers, which they don't count, but if they did, if one of your echoes would be 5003 plus 4157 plus 2767 plus 1171 plus 281 plus 281. And then the next one would be maybe 4349 plus 4157, 2767, etc. Every permutation of these columns. Each of these can be one of 6 numbers, and then it feeds into all the other ones, and you wind up with large numbers of echoes. How large? Well, that looks probably fine. It's a little bit of a high number there, but all to the good, I guess. When I say how large, let's do like, no, let's say 900. 900 seat arena. If I run a 6x6 matrix, which is the same as using all of these numbers in combinations. You know how you had those little spots in there? This would be what you would get out of a full-on 6x6 matrix. Every pixel there, slightly vertically stretched, is an echo return. You get not 256 or 27 or like 54 or 3,000 or 6,000 echoes. You get like 80,000 echoes, and that's what you're seeing is 80,000 distinct points drawn out as a picture. And the thing is, the ones that are bright little spots, those are prime numbers. Part of what I'm doing is trying to highlight what the prime numbers are. Honestly, I'm happy enough with how that's working that maybe I would like to make it subtler. Because I am like 9 minutes away from uploading this and going and having tacos. You'll be able to download this as it is and play with it. It's probably close enough to functional that it'll generate more good sounds just by pressing a button. That is certainly the hope. So here's the line of code where it highlights stuff. So if we do this, then all of the prime numbers will at least be like half brightness. And if I go through here, I can change all the rest of them in the same way. And that might look less tacky. As much as I'm excited about the prime numbers, the novelty has worn off to the point where I'd like the end result to look a little bit smoother, especially since I'm now using that blue tinge as an indication of high frequency content. So let's see, that should have gotten that taken care of. Do a quick save. See, if begins has T, that is searching an array that's full of primes. And also if there was something there. Otherwise, it would just fill the entire area with a grid of primes. So got that. And we've got that. and we've got that. They do appear to all be set up correctly. Let's see what this looks like now. Back to the 900, 6x6. Nothing else has changed, but it should look very different, and indeed it does. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. I feel like I can kind of see where the prime ones are sort of standing out, but it's not really very obvious. But then that information is already not all that super duper relevant, really. I mean, you can kind of see it, but then with the middle of that section, yep, they show up against sort of the backdrop there. And then in theory, you run this. It's done a little less than 2,000 variations so far. And by the time you check up with it the following morning, it will have tried millions upon millions of... Oh, I remember one of the things I wanted to try. Let's do one final little hack in there and hope that it holds up. And it lives up here. So we're looking at search 6. But they're all going to have this. Or controls. Select int equals randi, like left shift 20 plus. What this does is it tracks a particular number, which is as many things as it's able to do since it last changed. That's what since means. Since is a kind of bailout. The thing crashes if it goes above 720,000 between updates. I don't know why. I just have a workaround. Rand I ++ 20 plus synths left shift 16, what that means is it's generating random numbers, but then as it continues to go, what happens is it starts bringing in more and more of these ones. Select 7 or select larger than begins room size times 100. This is bringing in previous winners, gold, silver, bronze, steel, brass, copper, a series of previous ones that had succeeded. And this, since with that going on, is essentially doing an integer shift that starts leaning harder and harder on bringing in those previous ones. But I think what's happening is it goes so often, or it's able to go for so long, that it stops actually being able to try any new random values. Now, previously, what it had been doing before I brought in the genetic algorithm part was using exclusively random values. But we're not necessarily doing that. I think it's time to try doing it with only this. And we can bump it 1 just in case. But I'm thinking I want it to continue to have access to randomness. And it looks like we maybe have slightly different values for each one, but that can't be right. Oh, got to go farther up. There we go. Nope, that does appear to be 16 each time. I think it was 16 every time. There we go. So if each of those get changed simply to 21, we have a consistent amount of randomness that's being used and a consistent amount of previous entries being used. Although if it is not actually finding a previous entry, what it will do is just go to random again. See, if delays entries equals 0, they start out as 0. Then we end up doing this with it. And then if we use the number directly, then we use the number directly. And it's room size times 100. So that's where we're getting our numbers effectively. So that is what I would call a final change. That profoundly affects the way that this all works. In theory, it will let it do more in the way of randomness, and we can check fairly quickly in this last minute of stream and see whether it is doing anything or whether it has refused to do anything. If it's working, we will see results that continue to update at least a little bit. We got up to update 6. Maybe it doesn't want it to be 21. Like, look at it go, and it's not finding anything. This implies that this business with the select was actually pushing it from the point where it was able to do random numbers to a point where, oh, no, it found one. It found one. Oh, we're continuing to go. So my comment there says shift 23, which is literally we're doing 21, seems to produce a decent amount of randomness as it goes. Int rand I is the full range. So int rand I, like I guess that's right shifted, means the numbers it produces are just simply going to be smaller. It's just making smaller numbers. Because if it has a near infinite size available, it's going to be leaning on all of the randomness and never drawing upon any of its other options. Although we have taken its start, like, I don't know if this shift 23 seems to produce a decent amount of randomness is really what I'm looking for, though. I'm not convinced it's really doing that. I think it might be leaning on the scores a little bit too much, although that is what it's meant to do. I'm just concerned that I've only gotten up to update 8. It suggests that it is trying the wrong thing. So previously, 20 was where it started. Left shift of smaller numbers will produce even more randomness. And I think I can probably delete this observation about how shift 23 produces a decent amount of, like, if 21 is not producing a decent amount of randomness, 23 sure as heck will not. So we're going to remove that comment because that comment is full of lies and nonsense. And we're moments from me going off and having tacos, I must warn you. But still, it's been an interesting and productive day so far as it went. Hello, Gabby. Don't mind me tinkering with stuff. Let's see if this starts introducing new options faster. Okay, we're already up to update 8. Good. I'm not seeing a lot of, you know something, I can actually watch how it does. I know I was supposed to be having tacos, but this often happens. Display window. 200? Nay. Well, probably only 400 will do. Meaning this will now be visible. These won't, but that can be fixed too. You'll see all this stuff operating. And then we will be able to see whether these things update, because they will start out as 0. So here's our numbers. Watch them go. So we got to update 9. Here's the numbers that you can also see printed out here. They're kind of not budging. They look as if they could be random. We're not arriving at anything though. So what happens if we believe what it previously said, that 23 did in fact give decent amounts of randomness? Is that true, or are they just going to sit there looking like zeros? No, they're jumping around pretty good. Although they are showing very small numbers, to the point where it looks like doing that, it's giving me randomness. I think it's also incorporating earlier settings, but it's not getting up to the correct amounts. It's stuck. No matter what I tell it to do, it's not able to produce really large numbers. Interesting. Maybe I can come up with an insight here, because I am actually able to look at these numbers now. It's just they are incapable of coming up with the correct number. So 23 has limits to how big it can even go. Otherwise, it would be going bigger than that. We will start with this. And I'm just trying to figure out room size matters here. It's a value that I get to use. I don't want to wrap myself around the axle here too hard. So what happens if we go even harder? We're going to try to intentionally do a wrong number and see what we get. 24 is even bigger than 23. I believe this is shifting it down to where it's unable to produce numbers larger than about 200. That's interesting. So then logically, that would be fine if I was going for a small room. I bet that's consistent with if I was going for like 100. I can leave the rest of it the same. and it'll probably behave itself fairly good. Or perhaps not. Meh, kinda. It's definitely a challenge trying to generate a room that small, but that's arguably even smaller. You know, my numbers need to be larger even to reach 100 seats. It's clearly way too tiny. So, quit out of there. I can see what it's doing with those numbers. So, 24 is impossibly small. $20 will be ginormous. Let's call it a 2,000-seater arena, and it will probably be able to reach those numbers. Yep, it got there. So I'm giving it a range of possible numbers that it can do, and it's able to reach them. If it doesn't expand out to those numbers, it's more likely to get the ones that are being repeated. I think I'm not sure whether they're 32 or 64. They're probably 32. At least the rand I is probably giving me that, judging from the looks of things, judging from the looks of what I'm getting. And then if I shifted it even less than that, almost everything is in the random zone. But it is going to be wrapped by the maximum room size. So it's stretching out further, potentially. But we're getting a lot of randomness added. See, when it's less than a certain amount, it's going to try to redo one from one of the previous settings. So the closer I get to not being able to generate these random numbers, the more it's going to stick with stuff that worked before. And I can kind of wing it with this. Like, this is basically working. I believe it is just a very heavy dose of randomness rather than making use of the genetic algorithm stuff I have going on. And I'm hoping to use some of that because I think it might make it more effective. So my max number appears to be room size times 100. So what would I get if I made it be and 24 minus do I get to do that? Because it's times 100, right? So mind you, I have a max of room size that is really quite large. Let's see what it does. Let's see what this does. Our 2,000-seater, does it reach its full size or not? That looks fairly much like it's hitting its marks. Oh, but that's a very small hall. That's interesting. That could simply be more randomness. But then, as I said, it did reach some of the required halls. So if we then do a 200-seater, what does that then do? It appears to be appropriate behavior. It appears to be more or less on the mark. This is essentially what I'm looking for, is it trying to produce results that are desirable. There's just so many interlinking factors in all of this. Like, you see it. There's a lot here. There's a lot underneath the hood. But this is about what I'm looking to see as a result of this wacky little beast. Oh yeah. See, previously I've seen it go up to update numbers like this run overnight. So this is probably a good sign. A few more experiments, and then I will call it a day. 100 seats as a 6x6. I haven't updated any of the other ones yet. Oh, that looks pretty. I bet that would be a good-looking small verb. That has a pleasing look to it. I have a good feeling about an algorithm that's giving me stuff like that. Because the depiction of it as a picture correlates with what I'm going to get out of it. So I know that if there is this long space between the first sound, it's going to be a pause followed by a sort of thump of an echo. If it's all concentrated in one area, that means it's not going to sound that much like a reverb. There's a lot about this that is probably boding well. I have further experiments to do. Namely, what do we do when asked for a ridiculously large place? I don't normally do these because they don't always work out that great, but I want to see what the algorithm does. And right on. I'm not particularly happy about how long of a time it takes to get to that point, and that's because very few of these are smaller numbers. In fact, it appears to be doing a sort of runaway. I think I have a maximum size for the size of this window. But all in all, the changes appear to be working? Question mark? Because now we're looking at the matrix itself. And what I'm seeing is a fair bit of it appears to be behaving itself. And it's just looking for its highest score out of all of this. Let us quickly try half of that. $2,500, all the same settings. Ooh, pretty. Pretty, pretty, pretty. That bodes well. I've heard reverbs that have that kind of behavior in them before. Now that's less impressive, I think, but there must be something about it that's doing good. Probably having to do with these red readings, so maybe I can dial some of that back. If it's being fussy about that, what would happen if the constraints for naturalness were slightly less at the beginning? BG, BC, CG, BG. See, that almost sounds like it's a something. What does this now look like now that the R channel is much less demanding? Yeah. That might just work. I would like that cloud to be wider, but honestly, it's pretty darn wide. Like there's a pause before you hit the first part of it, but then there's about twice the width of that. That's interesting. That's a very soft attack and a very dense ending. Sort of sweeping in. And then all of the reverb density is up at the end. I'm not quite sure what that stuff is about. Have I miscalculated something? Keeping track of what all of these controls do is a bear. But, you know, why the heck not? And I'm asking it for an unreasonable thing. I'm trying to run it as 2,500 seats, which is really not that keyed in towards being able to deliver. And it's doing a fairly decent job. Although I see what is updating here. This is something and this is something. I believe this is target seats. See, I told it to do this, but then the internal calculations are looking for even more. This is the number of iterations it's able to do between these updates. So it's trying 100 of those a second, roughly. It's actually not quite as many as that. But it's chugging away. So let's go through and make all of those be matching this. Because that should apply to each of these places. And it'll still incorporate these other examples, and I gotta do project settings. Viewport height goes back to 200. No, 200. And then it will look normal again. And if I run it on like a 700-seater 4x4 matrix, it will start trying to generate one. And in fact, it's kind of in the zone and it's doing its level best. Given that 256 echoes really isn't enough to be sure of that, so what I'm going to do is try again, but instead a 400-seater 6x6 matrix. And if this looks nice, I'm calling it a day. Oh yes, that looks nice as anything. It starts up with more immediate reverbs, but then, oh, that still looks nice. I like the fact that this early reflection is shortening up. Although the way these work, you can get away with a little bit more space in there. But yeah, this is all looking like gold right out of the box. Like this is really going to end up being nice. And I'll run a batch of these overnight. I'll see what I get. I got fairly decent stuff last night, but this is going to be different in a bunch of different ways, and I'm very curious to see how it works out. And on that note, I am going to take this and export it. So I can copy it over and replace the bank of them that I've got sitting and waiting. If you go there, it's almost ready. There it goes. It's all done. And I'm going to hit save and quit. And I am going to do this. That's the main new change. And then if I do this, we have now updated it. So you now have what I made. It is live on the internets, and you can download what I was just doing. And on that note, I'll talk to you later because it's 5:24 and it's time for me to have dinner. Bye-bye.